Do you ever look at your plant and think it's just not quite right? Perhaps it's maybe not luscious enough, or is it not big and beautiful enough, or it's just lacking a bit of oomph? Well, it might be because that plant is missing one of the most important things that it needs to thrive, and that is a good amount of light. So let's talk about 10 different signs. If you've seen some of my videos before, you know that I like a nice list. So we've got 10 different ways that your plant is telling you that you might need more light, because your plants do talk to you. And I promise you by the end of this video, you'll be able to spot these signs in no time. Okay, starting off with number one, and it might be one of the most obvious signs that your plant is telling you, and that is when a plant is leaning towards the light source. Sometimes if you've got a plant that's a little bit away from a window, you might notice it leaning across and facing towards the window. It might be getting quite a bit of growth, but it's still facing or maybe flopping, or maybe the stem is bending a little bit and it's trying to get to more light. Plants are actually quite clever. They'll find a brighter light source if they need it, and they'll try hunting out for it a little bit. I once saw this social media post where this tree, I think it was Dracaena, was at the top, on the second level at the top of the stairs, and it literally went over the balcony and all the way down to the light source at the window. So plants definitely tell you in one way or another how and when they need more light. Now in this case, you do want to just double check that perhaps it's not leaning in one side because it's falling over and tipping over. That might be an issue because it's got quite high and you haven't got a big enough weight at the base. But ultimately, it's not about it leaning over, it's about the plant actually curving on the stem. Okay, number two in the list is leggy growth. Leggy growth is a term that you might have heard here and there, but ultimately leggy growth is talking about when the growth between where the two leaves come out, they're called nodes, where the two leaves come out is getting longer and longer and longer, and it seems to be stretching and stretching and stretching. If you've got enough light on the plant, the space between where the two leaves come out, or the space between the two nodes, can actually be short and gathered and stocky kind of thing, and that makes the leaves look really bushy and the plant look really full. If your plant is not looking full, it might still be growing upwards, but it looks quite sparse and there's not as many leaves as you like. That means it's got space between the nodes, and it is another sign that your plant is looking for more light and perhaps doesn't have enough energy to give out as many leaves as it probably should. In this case, it still is putting out leaves because it's trying to grab more of a light source, and the more green from the leaves, that's where it gets its energy. But ultimately, if you've got leggy growth and it's too long between leaves, you might want to find a brighter light source. Okay, sticking with that stem type of growth, another sign that you might see is when you look at the new growth coming out, the new stem coming out, you might have a stem growing with absolutely no leaves. It's still growing, but when you get to the next node, no leaf comes out, and then you get to the next node and no leaf comes out, and now you've got all of this growth and it looks like it's just putting out this stem, but there's no leaves. What's happening here is that plant is putting all of its energy to the new stem growth so it can go out and search for more light. Again, plants are pretty clever, they'll go searching for more light when they need it, but it doesn't have enough energy to put new leaves onto that stem. So if you want more luscious leafy growth, you do need to give the plant more light so it can have enough energy to grow both the stem and the leaves. And it does need the leaves, so it photosynthesizes from the sun. It's so hard to say. Okay, up to number four. So we've talked about the top of the stem having no leaves, but there's another sign, and it's actually a bit the opposite. Sometimes you'll get a plant that is growing up the top and it's growing new leaves up the top. But every time it grows a new leaf up the top, it's losing a leaf from the base. Has that ever happened to you before? That does happen to me, particularly on philodendrons, I find sometimes if it's not getting enough light. And again, it just goes back to that energy equation. If the plant doesn't have enough energy to keep all the new growth that's coming, it's going to sacrifice the oldest leaves and keep the newest leaf and the newest growth available. So again, it can go out and search and look for more light. The energy that that plant has got, while it might be okay, it's not enough to fulfill all of the growth it needs. And so it's just doing what it needs to do to keep the growth going, but it is sacrificing leaves right down the bottom, the older leaves, to help itself maintain life and to help itself keep going. So interesting, isn't it? Plants are living creatures, and they know when they're not getting enough light, they'll look after themselves and they will do what they need to do to survive. They can be pretty tough out there, but you just need to watch out for these signs. And before we go on to our next tip, I just want to say, if you are enjoying the value from this video and you're learning some new things, please do make sure you subscribe to this channel, hit the like button on this video, and help me share this channel out to more people. Here at Leafy Lovin', I try and share as many tips as I can on how to keep your plants happy, healthy, and lush and beautiful looking. And I'd love to have you on this plant journey with me. So make sure you do hit that subscribe button right now, like right now. There we go. So in plant care, new leaves, I think, are one of the most exciting things to happen in plant growth and plant care. When you see a new leaf coming out, you're so excited that that plant is giving you a new leaf. But another sign to look out for, if it's not getting enough light, even if it does produce a new leaf, is that those leaves are getting small, and they're getting particularly small compared to the leaves that it used to have. Maybe you've even moved that plant recently from a brighter light to a less brighter spot, and you will automatically see those leaves get quite small in comparison to the leaves that it's grown before. Now you've got to monitor this as well, because if you've got a vining plant and you've put it on a shelf and you've put the light on top of the plant, but you're letting the vines drop down, those leaves do start to get a little bit smaller as well, because vining plants will grow bigger leaves once it's climbing. However, when it doesn't have enough light, the difference in size between new growth not getting enough light and the older growth versus just a vining plant is a lot smaller. That new growth will be really small. You'll notice it comparatively. So just watch out that, again, going back to the energy thing, going back to the leaves, watching how the new growth occurs is a really important sign, and you'll know that that plant is telling you that it has enough light or not. Okay, the next 3 signs I'll talk about are probably not as obvious as the ones I've already spoken about. One of the signs that your plant isn't getting enough light is it's just stalled its growth. Like, there's nothing really happening. It doesn't look sad, but it doesn't look happy. It's kind of like in this middle phase. Now, if your plant isn't growing at all and it's just sitting there and staring at you, it could be a few different things. To be honest, I have created a whole different video of all the things it could be. If you want to have a look a little bit more, I'll leave that link up here. But ultimately, the most likely sign that that plant isn't growing is the light source. So again, no growth, paused growth might mean that that plant is looking for more light, and it's just reserving its energy in time for when more light comes. Maybe it thinks it's looking for spring or summer, and that plant just doesn't grow. It doesn't go anywhere, so it might have enough light to sustain itself, but it isn't getting as much light as it needs to grow more leaves or more stems, or just give you more growth. And then another sign on plants is just leaves being dull and a little bit pale. A healthy plant has vibrant green leaves, or vibrant variegated leaves. You'll see a really nice strong color. So if your leaves are looking a little bit light in color, or really pale yellow, and it's not necessarily the normal color of those leaves, it's another sign it just doesn't have enough energy to sustain the photosynthesis and create that green, bright colored leaf. It's all got to do with getting the sun through the green in the leaves, photosynthesizing, and giving it enough energy. That's what light helps with, obviously, with the plant. It gives it its food. It's not the fertilizer that gives it its food. Fertilizer, think of it more like vitamins. Plants get their food from light, from the light source, from the sun, from a grow light, whatever it is. It needs light to survive and thrive really well. So you might have dull, pale, and lifeless leaves, but what if you've got a variegated plant? Sometimes if you've got a variegated plant, the ones with all the bright colors, I love white and green variegated plants. Sometimes those plants will go all green. Now, in this way, the variegated plant is telling you in its own specific, unique way that it needs more light to keep that variegation more prominent. Because what's happening is the plant is realizing it doesn't have enough light, so it's creating more green in its life, and it's more efficient for that plant to create more light. Perhaps you've got a pot and it's got a few different growths in it. Some of that growth is a lot more white, and some of that growth is a lot more green. Have you had that before? I definitely have. For example, my peace lily definitely has that. And the plants with a lot more green can create more energy. So if they've got more green, they will fight for space, for energy, for light, and the all green leaves will grow a lot more than the ones with white. The ones with white will not have as much energy as the green leaf. If you've got a variegated plant and you want it to really thrive and be really variegated, you've got to give it a lot of light. So in that case, more green in those leaves, losing your variegation, means you haven't got enough light to sustain the more variegated style. So give it a lot more light. Okay, we've talked about the top, we've talked about the leaves, talked about everything except the base. And the base is probably the hardest thing to see when it comes to a plant, whether it's being healthy or not. But there are 2 signs where the potting mix or the soil or the base will tell you that the plant doesn't have enough light. Number 1 is that soil just stays too wet for too long. Now that could be a mix of not enough light and cooler weather and cooler months, a little bit of everything, but of course with the cooler months comes less light anyway. So if you are watering your plants without enough light, you're just not getting enough warmth or energy for that soil to dry out. And that kind of makes sense. So again, the plant won't grow, and it might even lead to a really damp, soggy soil, and that's not a good thing, right? So if your plant is taking perhaps longer than 5 to 7 days for that soil to dry out, you definitely need to A, stop watering, and B, perhaps move it to a brighter and or warmer position. So soggy soil, staying wet for too long is another perhaps sign, a less obvious sign that your plant maybe needs more light. And then the final sign that your plant needs more light is probably the one you don't want to see. It's definitely not the one I like seeing, because you can't really come back from it. And that is mushy leaves and mushy stems. If you pick up a leaf and that leaf has died off and it's like really wet and soggy and it's like, Oh, it's just not a nice feeling. It's like a soggy tissue. It's not a nice feeling. If you've got a mushy leaf, it's not really a good sign. Now, if that mushy leaf is the really old leaves from the edge, like some alocasias will lose a leaf as they're growing a new leaf, maybe because it doesn't have enough light, and that last leaf will be a little bit mushy. That's okay, but it is still a sign that you might be overwatering and not giving enough light. So just do check that, stop watering immediately, and double check the soil and wait for the soil to dry out a little bit more. However, if you have mushy leaves coming out from the stem and the new leaves are all soft and icky, that is not a good place to be, unfortunately. It means your soil is staying wet for too long and you don't have enough light. It's probably a combination of both. And what has resulted there is maybe the roots have gone mushy, the stem has gone a little bit mushy, the plant can't take up the water properly, it can't use up the water it has, doesn't have enough energy from the light, and the whole plant is unfortunately suffering. You can't really come back from that one, unfortunately. You might be able to take propagations really quickly and see if you can save the rest of the plant, but ultimately mushy soft stems means the soil is wet for too long, the plant doesn't have enough light, the plant isn't getting enough energy, and it can't give itself enough energy to be resilient to any issues that it might be facing. So yeah, mushy leaves is a really icky one. I hope you don't get that in your lifetime. Please see if you can catch some of the other signs that we've already talked about before you get to that point. So from root to tip, that plant will tell you whether it's looking for more light or not. And now that you know some of the signs, you're one step closer to keeping that plant beautiful, happy, healthy, luscious, green, vibrant, and really giving it some oomph to help it grow. And just remember, every plant is different, so the amount of light it needs is always just a little bit different. There are some plants that handle less light, and there are definitely some plants that need more light. But the good news is, when your plant needs more light, it's a fairly simple fix. You can either move it closer to a window, that's probably the most obvious one, or you can buy it some grow lights and help it thrive that way. But ultimately, a little bit of extra brightness can make the world of difference to your plants and to you. So if you don't have enough windows in your house, just like I do, and you need to buy some grow lights, I have created a video all about how to approach buying the right grow light for the right plant in your house. I'll take you from beginning to end in this video right here. So please do go and watch that video next. Again, as always, have a week full of leaves, love, and a lot of laughter. I'll see you in the next video, or I'll see you over in this one. See you later. Can you hear that? Slurp, 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 slurp. My dog just starting to drink water when I'm starting to film. Yeah, it's that one.